Want to stream the Imaginary Friends show to your tablet or phone while on the move? Go to the Apple or Android store and download the Stitcher Radio app for free, or go to Stitcher.com. Or use Magic, motherfucker.
Every time I got a chance, my Bible tape's on in the car.
Well, sorry is not the kind of word that John Howard uses.
When you read the Bible in Luke, you will know that Luke is not from New Jersey. And he's like this right here.
Sorry, I keep saying I have not used the word conspiracy.
With respect to the issue of whether gays and lesbians should be able to get married.
You must understand the Federal Reserve is a cartel made up of the major banks.
It's a very interesting thing, losing one's religion. I think it's a revolution for one.
Actually, I don't even have a car right now. My car got stolen 4 weeks ago.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to this, the 117th iteration of the Imaginary Friends show, Dote Comb Podcast, the one true podcast on science, religion, politics, current affairs, and anything we manage to psychically extricate from the brains of toddlers and infantile journalists. In fact, the one true podcast that thinks it's ever so slightly amusing that Deep South Christians, who regularly refer to Mormonism as a cult, resoundingly voted to make a Mormon their country's president. I am your host, Jake Farwharton, and listeners, I have to say, it is such a distinctly sensuous pleasure to be deep inside your auditory canals on this fine, fine day.
It's bloody adjectives that you come up with.
All right, fine. So joining us today, as always, is Hulk Hogan's body double and Stephen Hawking's brain double, Pete Darwin. Welcome, Pete.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Did you like that? Do you like being referred to as Hulk Hogan's body double?
Oh man, I've been getting confused for him so much recently. It's been a nightmare.
Is that because he's recently had a sex tape put out?
No, yeah, and the shaved head, and the me being 5'9". That's it's just.
I'm pretty sure he's 10'12" or something. Anyway, today Pete Darwin is actually going to be Mr. Darwin, so was not too confused with our special guest for today, who is someone who I've actually wanted to get on the show for months, literally months, listeners. He's a lecturer in philosophy at Portland State University and one of the strongest voices for atheism and secularism in the USA. And he's about to be the best-selling author of A Manual for Creating Atheists. His name is Dr. Peter Boghossian, and I would like to welcome him to the show. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
No, it's our pleasure. It's all our pleasure. I know it's probably pleasurable to be speaking to us. It is the listeners and mine and Mr. Darwin's pleasure to have you on the show.
That's very kind of you. You've already put a huge smile on my face and made me laugh, and we haven't even begun the interview yet.
I know, it's crazy, right? It's crazy, right? Well, the laugh stopped there. Now, if you'll both indulge me for a couple of minutes, I thought it might be fun to introduce a new segment to the show whenever we have a new guest on the show, and I think we'll do it for everybody that we have on the show. So it's a 60-second speed round of, sort of, quote, getting to know you type questions for each new guest, so that listeners have some idea of who they're talking to, and so that guests can relax and chill out before, we head into the meat of the podcast, the kangaroo meat of the podcast. You know what I mean? So, Mr. Darwin, why don't we put you in the hot seat first, so that you can show Pete how it's done?
Oh gosh, I'll strap myself in.
Okay, strap yourself. Are you strapped in, Pete?
I'm ready to go.
Right, here we go.
Give me the treatment.
Take a deep breath. Remember, of course, that we are a comedy podcast, so feel free to let the hyperbole and poetic license unleash it. Just let it free.
The fury is poised.
Okay, good. All right, start the clock. Number 1, in which city, state, and country were you born?
Australia, Melbourne,
Number
Victoria.
2, what colour eyes do you have? Number 3, Were you ever in a band, and if so, what was your band's name?
Ishka.
Number 4, who is your favourite scientist of all time? Number 5, do you think cats are...
I've got to think these things through, dude. You can't just dump that on me. These are serious questions.
It's 60 seconds, Pete. It's 60 seconds. All right? Do you think cats are A, adorable, B, terrible as a pet, or C, delicious?
C.
Number 6, what is your favourite food?
Cats.
Number 7, spell jovial.
Jovial.
Number 8, what do you do to relieve stress?
You don't want to know.
You're supposed to say, come on the ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast. Number 9, in your opinion...
Literally.
Number 9, in your opinion, is the sport of dressage a sport?
No.
Okay, good. And number 10, last question. Are you ready?
I'm poised. I'm ready.
What was Rene Descartes' most famous philosophical realization, which he actually made on the Rene Descartes Hour of Power, I think, his podcast. I don't know whether you've heard that before.
I'm going to have absolutely no idea. I think, therefore, I am.
That's correct, yes.
Yes!
Congratulations to Pete, the speed Googler.
Yes. No. Hands-free. Hands-free.
Hands-free speed
You would have heard the typing. You would have heard the typing.
Well done, well done. So, Peter, are you ready?
Yeah, I was. I'm a little nervous about the speed of this, but I'll do the best I can.
You should have got him to go first.
No. This is good. This is good. All right. So Here we go. We're counting down, and I'm going to start the clock in 3, 2, 1. Peter, number 1, what colour hair do you have?
Grey.
Number 2, being from Portland, can you tell us whether the comedy series Portlandia is actually funny to anybody outside of Portland?
No, I've never seen it.
Number 3, what is your favourite philosopher of all time?
Socrates.
Number 4, that's a good answer, actually, I agree. Number 4, what was your favourite subject in high school?
English literature.
Number 5, why is the sky blue? Number 6, when attending a formal dinner, does one start with the cutlery on the outside or the inside of the place setting?
Inside.
It depends on the country.
Okay, good answer, I think. Number 7, would you prefer a weekend camping in the great outdoors or a weekend in a luxury hotel?
Luxury hotel.
Yes, I agree. When your partner asks you if a particular item of clothing makes them look like a domesticated rhinoceros or not, do you tell them the truth or a white lie?
I'd tell them the truth, but I'd watch my tone.
Number 9. What is the 18th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution?
It made alcohol illegal.
No, it was suffrage, women's suffrage. Number 10, what is your favourite who was your favourite Republican in this year's electoral field and why?
Look at that, we're out of time.
Oh, I love Herman Cain. Did you hear Herman Cain yesterday?
No, I didn't.
He was so fantastic. He says that we need a third party because Republicans are unfortunately they're too moderate, they're too centrist, so they need a third party.
Just keep me in line.
Yeah, he's basically saying that the Tea Party's movement, and I don't think anybody can deny the fact that the Tea Party...
They're not extreme enough.
Well, I think the Tea Party is definitely a movement unto itself, and they are certainly crazy enough to create a party. And let's face it, during the Republican primaries, everybody, including, centrist Mitt Romney, or centrist, when he was running for the governor of, was it Michigan?
Massachusetts,
thank you. Yeah, so when he was running for governor of Massachusetts, he was supported by Planned Parenthood. He was pro-gay rights, etc., etc. And when he ran for president, he was pushed so far to the right that I'm surprised that he was allowed to have a part on the left.
Well, you got to do what you got to do to win. Ask Lance Armstrong.
Yeah, I think you have to take into account the political nuances in the way the system works here. That's pretty much what people do. They run to the right to get to the party's nomination, and they run to the center. Yeah.
Which is funny because I would consider Obama a bit of a centrist as well.
Well, if you listen to some people, he's like a reconstructed Maoist.
Oh, well, that's undeniable. That's undeniable. His chubby cheeks, you know, his short stature, the way he dunks a basketball, you know, everything just shouts Mao.
Yeah. Well, your argument is impeccable. You have
Game over.
So now, before we get to the soy-based meat substitute of the podcast, even though Pete abhors vegans, we have a vegan audience, by the way, Pete, and you've offended every single one of them as well.
I better be nice.
I wanted to briefly chat about what, to me, was the most hilarious story to come out of this week's election result. You may remember Pastor Bill Keller. His Christian Newswire actually call him the world's leading internet evangelist, and we've certainly talked about him once or twice in the past on the show. He was the guy who, through his enormously popular Christian daily devotional message, had convinced over 2.2 million people to vote for Jesus on their ballots on Election Day, instead of actually voting for a living and historically verifiable candidate.
What a waste of time.
Well, it's funny that you say that. So, as you may well know, listeners, only about 1/3 of the American population vote, as it's not compulsory to do so. And this means that a good portion of the money spent by presidential candidates, and certainly by Obama as he was discussing the strategy for spending his money this time around, it went into busing registered voters to polling booths so that they could get their vote counted. So it is actually a pretty big bloody deal for any candidate if you can get 2.2 million people to get off their butts and get them into gear. And this becomes a complete scandal, right? When you get these 2.2 million people to throw away their vote to fictional characters like Roseanne Barr or Jesus.
But do you really want people who are going to throw away their vote on fictional characters to be voting for a leader anyway? Wouldn't you prefer they'd vote for Jesus than actually between Obama and Romney?
Perhaps they are fictional characters anyway, Obama and Romney. Perhaps they are. As such, it shouldn't be a surprise at all that Keller's hilarious campaign has been named as one of the chief reasons why Romney was not elected. Some are actually holding him personally responsible and blaming him for Obama's victory. A press release was circulated yesterday with the heading, quote, "Pastor responsible for Obama re-election through Vote for Jesus campaign says, quote, America is the real loser." How good is that?
Is the next contender on The Biggest Loser?
Well, I'll tell you what, Bill Keller, we here at the ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast disagree. We think you, dear sir, are the real loser. How good is that, though? Seriously, you get 2.2 million people in to actually vote, right, which is hard enough, and they end up throwing away their vote.
I would laugh if he came out tomorrow and said he was an atheist and he was just trolling.
Or an Obama supporter. I think that would be even funnier.
Do you believe man never really landed on the moon?
Do you believe in ghosts?
Do you know that 9/11 was an inside job?
Do you believe in psychics and the interventionary power of prayer?
Do you believe that Ron Paul will actually be president one day?
Do you regularly speak in tongues whilst down on your knees hungrily consuming the flesh of Jesus?
Just because a small group of scientists say that man-made climate change is happening doesn't make it real, does it?
Do you believe that Christianity is the religion of love, Islam is the religion of peace, and Judaism is the religion of milk and honey? If you believe any of those things, or really anything that you've told somebody about just prior to them punching you in the throat, the ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast is most definitely not for you. The ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast, brought to you by 14.3 billion years of evolution.
I wanted to have Peter on, and I've wanted to have him on for so long, so it's great to have him on, and he's just about completed his new book, as I said, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Now, I also said in the beginning of the show that you're a philosopher, so could you just elucidate for me
Sure.
Is philosophy still useful in today's society?
I think it is. I think that we can use the tools of philosophy to help people to think better and to think through problems and to think more clearly. And all the jokes aside, I think that many of the things that you pointed to in the beginning of your podcast show us that we need more philosophy. We need more rigor in our thinking. We need to be careful about how we articulate ourselves, and philosophy can teach us that. So I think it is still useful, even though there's a lot of nonsense. A friend of mine, Steve Goldman, said it's important nonsense. I think philosophy is incredible. It certainly can be incredibly useful. Thinking critically, thinking through ideas, evaluating arguments, weighing claims, that stuff is important. That stuff matters. It matters because we can use the processes that we come to think about the world and make conclusions that we can then rely upon. So it's the opposite of faith, by the way.
And the way that you articulate, I'm sorry for interrupting you there, because you actually made a good point there at the end. But
actually, you seem surprised. No, go ahead.
No, I'm not at all surprised. But it's quite interesting. You know, you make this point, and it is correct. You know, all of these things. You know, critical thinking, making an argument, making a succinct argument that sticks. You know, free of logical fallacies. They're all important things. So, isn't it too late to be teaching that at university? Isn't this something that needs to be taught in primary school?
Well, first, it's never too late. So I disagree that it's too late, but certainly we should start that as young as possible. I mean, I've tried to, in Portland here, put in programs in the high schools that we put in critical thinking, but that's definitely faced some challenges, some resistance. But yeah, one can never be too young to learn how to differentiate reality from make-believe land.
Yeah. And so what sort of resistance have you come up against?
Well, I mean, a lot of social resistance, political resistance, religious resistance, even resistance. Portland's kind of new agey from this new age community. You know, part of what critical thinking is, and I just released a lecture about this, is that someone has to be wrong about some ideas. And a lot of people they have no problem with you telling other people and explaining why the superstitions they have are fallacious or don't align with reality. But when you come to their superstitions, they draw the line.
Hey.
Right.
Of course, Socrates was never wrong, because he was the philosopher king. He could never be wrong.
Oh, I think he was totally willing to be wrong about anything. I mean, I think he was. That's why he was the wisest man, because he knew he didn't know.
Yeah.
He didn't pretend to know things he doesn't know. He wasn't arrogant, and I think we need a little more humility today.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough.
I definitely agree with you. I saw the lecture that you gave at the Portland Skeptic Society or Atheist Society on YouTube earlier today, and you were talking
Jesus, the Easter Bunny, and Other Delusions?
Back in January. And you were talking about, I think at the end you mentioned that you teach critical thinking classes in prisons as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, wow.
And I was going to ask, what have your experiences been with that? And I mean, I've reading The God Delusion, I think they mention a study in that says, or that shows that 75% of the US population is Christian, 75% of inmates are Christian, 10% of the population is atheist, and only 0.2% of inmates are atheists. Obviously, it's not whether or not you believe in a God that puts you in jail or keeps you out of jail. Is it the critical thinking, though, that can explain why there is that difference in proportion of atheists versus Christians in jail?
No, I don't think so. I don't really know that anybody knows the answer to that. I can tell you my speculations. I think a lot of these folks deal with deep structural problems in their lives, and it's not one variable. It's not, well, he can think critically or she can think critically or what have you. I think it's a complex combination of social and cultural factors, and again, they're probably different in Australia. I don't know the system over there, but I do know that oftentimes inmates feel trapped. They feel like they don't have choices. They've never, just to piggyback off of what Jake was saying, they feel that they haven't really had an opportunity to at any age to think, to learn what it means to generate alternatives and options, and what reliable ways of thinking are. And then the worst thing of all is then you have people of faith who go in there and they try to entrench them in their own particular faith delusions. And that's the last thing thing these people need. They don't need more delusions. They need to be in touch with reality.
It's just another cage.
So delusions aside, though, aren't there programs successful at all at reintegrating the inmates into the larger community once they are released?
Yeah, there are a lot of programs, and they focus on different aspects, but that assumes that there's money in the system.
Right.
I mean, the United States is not in good financial shape right now, and we see that in Oregon, and county, states, and municipalities see that as well.
But a lot of the faith-based organisations, for example, do get both federal funding as well as they're obviously funded by their by their internal structure, by their congregations, etc. And they never have to pay any taxes, of course, as well. But isn't, and I suppose I'm sort of framing this in a difficult way, but isn't the fact that these faith-based organisations are going into churches, are going into prisons to help these people, these inmates, to come out as citizens that are able to function in the real world? Isn't that a good thing?
Giving someone an epistemology that will lead them further from the truth is never a good thing. So what inmates in particular need is they need their ideas and their thought. They need these things to be tethered to reality. What they don't need is imaginary entities. They don't need unreliable ways to think about the world. They need jobs. The golden metrics of recidivism are jobs and housing.
Yeah.
They don't need to pray about jobs and housing. They need actual housing. And they need reliable strategies that they can use to get a job.
Yeah. So does the fact that we now have, I say we, my wife's American, I can say we. Okay. So does the fact that we have a president who has called for in the past evidence-based programs, does that buoy philosophers and atheists like yourself who are able to get into the prison population and to teach critical thinking programs? Does that buoy your programs financially in order to come out with evidence-based programs that can be implemented throughout the country and perhaps in other countries?
No.
That's really unfortunate. I was hoping you were going to. I was sure that you were going to say yes. So how the hell do you get into these? How do you get into the prisons? Is it your university that's funding them?
I do it all myself. It's all my own. I don't get any course buyouts for it. I don't get anything for it. I do it because I live here and I want to live next to people who aren't, who have the tools to successfully navigate reintegration in the community. So I do this just because it's a contribution I think I can make. I certainly don't make any money off of it. I mean, if anything, it costs me money.
Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't suggesting that. I'm more interested in, and I should say, you're a freaking hero if you're doing this out of your own
Exactly.
pocket. But I was more interested in, whether we're claiming research out of this, whether you're sort of coming out of this with some research that's able to be given to the government, given to government programs to integrate this into other prison populations, so that such programs can help other prisoners or other prisons.
Yeah. I mean, I hope so. So I have these Socratic conversations, and I bring a tape recorder in, and I have approval to do this, and this is what I did for my dissertation, and then I record the conversations, and then I publish those conversations, and then I show the moments in the conversation when people experience a type of openness, a type of belief openness, or a type of a trustfulness of reason. And then I explain methodically how you can be both a clinician and use these tools, these dialectical tools, to help people learn to reason. And, I publish those conversations. But it's almost that exact same thing when you help people lose their faith. You're really using a large, overlapping Venn diagrams. You're using a large set of the same skills, same tools.
Now, so talking about faith, I suppose you've famously stated, when I say famously, I mean famously within our circles, with our limited ranks, you've famously stated that faith is pretending to know things that you don't know. Can you talk on this?
Sure. I'm certainly not the first person to point that out. That has a long pedigree. But
Let's just say it was you. That way, it's yours. Copyright.
So, one of the goals of that talk was, look, we need multiple tools to combat the faith infection. And one of the things we need to do, and Dennett has written about this extensively, and I've talked about this in my interviews, because it's such a simple idea, it's easy to get across. We need to decouple the linkage of faith from morality, because right now people of faith are viewed as good people or moral people, and that we need to terminate that linkage. So pretending to know things you don't know, that's actually whenever anyone uses the word faith, bam, I just translate it like that in my head, and it makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah. It does. It seems, internally consistent. It seems very intuitively correct, I suppose.
Yeah, and there are some people are not pretending, and they're just full blown delusional.
Yeah.
But in addition, like if you say believe on the basis of evidence, a lot of people won't understand why that's important. There's nothing pejorative intrinsic to those terms, but the word pretending itself has a negative connotation. So we need some linguistic clarification. We need to clarify these terms.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Something you don't know.
So I suppose as you say, that there's nothing pejorative, I suppose, in that term, but there is, I suppose, a pejorative in the term, faith virus or faith infection.
Right.
Do you use those terms when speaking to believers, or how do you think they perceive that?
Okay, so first of all, there is no one way to conduct an intervention, and I like to look at all of these interactions with the faithful as intervention. So I'm not mad at them. I want to help them. Their thinking is damaged. They've been robbed of a way to view the world that's reliable. And so when I engage people in these conversations, I think of these people as people who desperately need my help, who are cognitively ill. So my role is to help them lose these pathological beliefs. The best way to lose a pathological belief is from a position of safety, from a point of view of safety. That's just parenthetically, by the way, why that film, The Innocence of Muslims, might not have done what the producer thought that it would. And I don't.
What did the producer think it was going to do?
I don't have the faintest clue. I realized that after I said that. I mean, maybe if his goal was to inflame people, he did a great job.
It worked.
If he gets an A+, but if his goal is to help people shed their faith and embrace reason and rationality, that's not the way to do it.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean, but I suppose I suppose when I was speaking to a believer, and I do this quite regularly. We go out on a Saturday night with our group of atheists, the Brisbane atheists. We go, well, not so much hunting, because they're there for us. They're always standing there, in between a couple of trees. You just have to line them up in your sight and walk forward. But they're there, and this group of fundamentalist Christians stand up and they preach every Saturday night. Right. And our group of atheists go out to basically actively counter everything that you say. Everything that they say. And I imagine, though, because I'm an ex-believer, I imagine, though, speaking to them and using terms like faith virus or faith infection would instantly turn them off.
Right. You're absolutely right. Now I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I just basically wanted you to talk on that. So, I mean, how do you approach it? I mean, obviously, you're not speaking. You're speaking about this in a metaphorical sense. You don't literally mean that they're infected with faith. But how do you approach this situation? How do you open the conversation with them?
Okay. Well, I don't use the term the faith virus when I'm with the faithful. The vast majority of times I don't. At some points I do. I mean, I think part of this is that your mind has to be limber and you need to respond. Different people will respond differently to different questions and different ways to ask questions. So, for the most part, no, I don't use the term the faith virus. So, what are you asking, how I do that, or what's the approach, or?
Well, I suppose, okay, so going back to the idea of, faith is pretending to know things that you don't know. So. Yeah. I suppose I'm interested in how religious people react to that kind of reasoning. When you talk to them and you say faith is You've said faith, you've said belief. Faith is, belief is just pretending to know something you don't know. How do they react to that type of an argument?
Different people will respond differently. I usually use that as a late line. So even to step back from this, you have to ask yourself when you have these engagements what your goal is. So my goal is always the same. And maybe this is where I differ from others, but my goal isn't to take anybody out of religion. My goal is to take faith away from people. And if you take faith away from people, you simultaneously cripple all religions. and not only do you do that, but you help people to develop more reliable ways of thinking through problems. And faith really is the culprit. So sometimes, again, it's very contextual. Maybe it's a late liner. Sometimes I'll say things like that. But actually, that's what my book is about. That's the goal of the whole thing. And can I speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, of course. Please do.
Yeah. So the goal is to give people these tools to go out and engage people of faith to help them lose their faith. And the book covers pretty much everything you need to know to get started to be what I call a street epistemologist, to go into the PTA, into the bars, into the streets, anywhere, and literally to talk people out of their faith. And it gives you clinical tools. It's primarily based in the Socratic method, but it gives people tools that I use, tools that the literature shows about how people have exited cults and even, successful recovery from drug and alcoholics. But drugs and alcohol. But to get back to your question, you need to kind of diagnose these people to see where they are. And I want to take one small issue with something you said. I think you used the word confront or something. I don't think that I think it's more productive to help people lose their faith if you don't look at these as confrontations and certainly debates. Because, again, people are less likely to change their pathological beliefs.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Actually, I just want to point out, I don't at all think that my listeners are uneducated, but I hate the word epistemology, but I will point out that it means how to know what we know, basically.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't say that to be pretentious.
No, I know you didn't. It's the name of your book, but I freaking hate that word. It's one of those words that it pops because I'm studying anthropology, and when we're doing the anthropology of religion, it pops up all the time, but in theological circles. And I hate that they've hijacked the term "how we know what we know" in terms of theology, because you can't know anything about theology. It's just these are all musings. It's ridiculous.
It's interesting.
It's
this is kind of this teaching people to think critically in order, in a way to sort of free them from religion and faith-based reasoning. It reminds me a lot of the Karate Kid and how he kind of gets taught to paint and then doesn't know why he's being taught to paint and to wax, and then all of a sudden later on he's just this martial art freak.
Good point.
If that makes any sense.
No, it does. Absolutely.
He doesn't know what's actually happening, but later on it all comes into place. So it's interesting that attacking faith more so than attacking religion itself is much more efficient at
It's a big bullseye. It's impossible to defend, and we can quibble over whether one should use the word epistemology. I think it's an incredibly helpful word because it basically is the word just means the study of knowledge. And even in that Easter Bunny talk, I said it's really the only $2 word that you need to know. I mean, it really is when you conduct these sorts of interventions. It's really the only thing you need to know because you need to I find it. Let me place it on me. I find it very helpful. Those interventions in which I'm most successful, I look at people's epistemology. I look at the way that they come to knowledge and the way they know things as it's like an architectonic structure, like a big house, right? And so what you want to do is you want to go, there are floors of the house, there's the foundation, there's the scaffolding, which holds up the upper floors, but you want to target the foundation. The faith really is the foundation. And it's, as long as that people define that word, as long as you're on the same page in terms of what that word means, and you don't have to use pretending to know things that you don't know, but as long as people are on the same page, it's very easy to look, everybody has a crisis of faith, right? They have realization that they shouldn't be pretending to know things they don't know, or that I mean, that's really what a crisis of faith is.
What is the sort of time period that these realizations, at least for those people who do lose their faith after you have these interventions or discussions with them, what sort of time period does that occur over? Is it the kind of thing where you'll have these discussions with them and by the end of it you'll literally see something in their eyes that has just clicked and it's all of a sudden changed? Or is it the kind of thing where they go away and just keep thinking about these things and you sort of open the door slowly and then eventually they lose their faith in religion later down the track?
That it's rare. It has definitely happened on the spot, but it's rare that it happens on the spot. Sometimes, and this is actually a good thing, people become more strident. You know, if the person conducting the intervention does it in the right way, people will become more strident and give the verbal behavior of being more certain of their beliefs. But there's a line of literature that's really interesting that shows that when people change these pathological beliefs, sometimes part of the process is that they have to go more into it. You know, they have to engage it even more, even come to have more faith. A certain percentage of those people, you know, you calcify them, you harden them. But it depends. If you, again, looking at it as an intervention, if you look at the whole thing as a treatment, sometimes people need multiple treatments. You know, I mean, sometimes I've done it on a few people for years and it hasn't worked. But hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people have come up to me, I mean, on the streets, email, Facebook, everything. And some people hate me, you know, and I mean, look, it's a scary thing, you know, learning to reason clearly and give up some delusions you have that are comforting, that scares people. Yeah. And so, you know, there's no one right way to do it. You know, there are certainly wrong ways to do it, but it takes patience and you have to deal with people with dignity and compassion because they're struggling. They don't want to have false beliefs. They don't want to be delusional.
Yeah. So let's go through this in a regimented way. How would you impart within somebody the tools in order to approach somebody, for example, on the street, a street preacher, for example, to help them to come to such realizations?
Boy, that I can't summarize my whole book. No, I mean it's complicated because you know you have to think about why people believe this, and there are many reasons for that. And then you have to think about, you have to be able to diagnose the stages. There are certain kind of stages. Like I like to, there's a line in this one type of literature about change behavior that deals with pre-hope. And I like that expression. I think many people who are fundamentalists, we tend to think, oh, these people are crazy. They'll never change their mind. I think that's a bad attitude. And I think we need to stop it, and we need to stop it now. Because they're cases of pre-hope. They haven't come to the point of view in their lives, their belief lives, where they realize that they need help. And it's incumbent upon us to help them. I mean, we should deal with them with composure and kindness. And, you know, if your goal is to help them to lose their faith, that's the way to do it. With patience.
I see what you mean. So I've been speaking a lot recently with a good friend of mine who's still quite a strident believer. And generally our discussions will degenerate to the point where he's arguing the evolution of faith and the evolution of belief, you know, sort of arguing that there has to be a reason why so many people believe. And I wonder, because I know that you've talked about this previously, Peter, can you talk about, you know, what do you think the origins of faith and belief are?
I don't have the faintest idea. I mean, I can throw out what other people have said, and I can throw out some ideas in literature. I mean, it could be, you know, Shermer talks about the brain being engine of belief and wired for belief, and there's increasing evidence that there's a neurological component. I don't know. I'm not qualified. I'm not a cognitive neuroscientist. I don't have the faintest clue. But I think it's complicated. I think it deals with culture. I think it deals with the idea that faith is a value. I think, you know, we think of evolution as a biological process, but ideas have an evolution. Just finishing up again, I listened to it on tape, Bill Bryson's History of Everything. Man, that is a
favorite book in the world.
Yeah, I mean, he talks about the history and evolution of faith, and my buddy just wrote a book about this, and it was fantastic. And I think I think we don't really know, but I think part of the problem is that we haven't become comfortable with not knowing yet. We're not comfortable with our own ignorance. Aristotle in Book 1 of the Metaphysics says all men desire to know, and I think that's right. I don't know the answer, and it's okay that I don't know the answer. I mean, I can conjecture or I can guess, but ultimately I don't know.
I think that often separates us from the faithful, and it is that comfort in not knowing. Whether it's,
how do we engender that? That's a whole different question in and of itself.
That's it.
Yeah, it's often frustrating when we get into these discussions. They'll often get to the point where they say, what started the Earth? And we can discuss that and
great question.
We'll go into great. We can talk about that in great detail because there's so much evidence for it thus far. So what created the universe? And, we can go into a bunch of different theories, and we can go into a fair amount of depth and with a fair amount of certainty, how we've come from the Big Bang to this point, 13.4 billion years later. And then they say, so what came before that? It's always frustrating to just say, I don't know.
Why? Well, that's it. Well, but you have to learn to become satisfied with that.
I know you do.
Yeah, let's take a look at that claim, though. First, I want to say, so your buddy said, well, why do you think so many people believe? Because a lot of people believe something, the number of people who believe a given proposition or have a certain belief, that doesn't increase the likelihood that it's true.
Of course. It's not a democracy.
Right. So, I mean, I would just bluntly state that. So the question of what came before is interesting, but that assumes that that's the whole something from now. That's actually, I wrote about that the other day. That's the trump card in the believer's deck, but unfortunately that card doesn't work.
Sorry. Yeah, the Lawrence Krauss discussion is always fascinating, and I use a lot of stuff, in fact, from Lawrence Krauss and from Bill Bryson. Because it's very explanatory, and it's always very helpful to discuss it in such a meaningful and yet simple way. And yet, when we get to the end of the conversation, generally it ends with "I don't know," and we have to be okay with it. But generally, they find, for whatever reason, the faithful find that it's almost offensive to say, I don't know.
Well, they want an answer. They have to have one.
They must, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say offensive. I'd say, and again, maybe you deal with a different set of believers in their cultural circumstances, but I'd say they have a certain smugness that masquerades as humility.
I liked one of your quotes from the lecture that I watched just before on you was that it doesn't take faith to say I don't know. It takes humility.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. And so the question is, when we engage people, how do we help them to become more comfortable with not knowing? How do we help them to see that it's not arrogant? It's a complicated problem because it varies from individual to individual, and there's no formula. They're just general principles that we can use to help people.
Yeah, fair enough. So, Peter, we were talking off air about liberalism as an ideology,
right.
And I wonder whether you can talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So to add to the number of people out to get me, in my book, I have a chapter that's a pretty brutal criticism of contemporary academic liberalism. And the basic idea, I know you hate the word epistemology, but really...
yeah. And to be clear, the reason why I hate it is not. I should have made this more clear. I apologise. I hate it because as I'm trawling through anthropologist literature for anthropology of religion, generally I get pulled into papers written by theologians who write about epistemology. So knowing, how to know the things that we know about theology, I find is just a really frustrating way to use that word, because they are, as sort of you've said, faith is pretending to know things that you don't know. So saying that you know things, how we know things that we know, in terms of theology, I think is an incorrect term. That's why I don't like it.
Yeah, no, thanks for clarifying. A good buddy of mine, Matt Thornton, said to me, he said, Pete, how's your book coming? And I said, it's slow. And he said, well, too bad it wasn't a book on theology, or you could just make stuff up.
That's awesome.
It'll be done already. But so
and you'd be a billionaire.
That's right. I claim tax exempt status. So back to the idea of liberalism. Liberalism has turned an epistemological critique, a critique of how somebody knows something. It's turned that into a moral taboo. So morally, we shouldn't criticize people who have faulty epistemologies. Mm. Think about, even think about the term Islamophobia. Think about that for a second. It's a fascinating term because it assumes that there's something. First of all, it medicalizes critiques of faulty epistemologies. So if you criticize someone who has a faulty epistemology, all of a sudden you have a medical condition. You're an Islamophobe, as opposed to something that's actually wrong with someone's epistemology. So how is it that we've turned a criticism of an epistemology into a moral thing? Like one ought not to do this. It's morally, or you're a jerk, or you're unkind, or you're uncouth, or that's rude, or that's hurtful. What happened? So I do a little genealogy, and I trace it, and I talk about these invasive values that are parasitic on liberalism, like the tolerance, multiculturalism, diversity, all of this stuff. These things are
relativism as well. Is just such
relativism. Yeah, I'd throw that in there too. That's a different type of poison altogether. But so these things really they've let the faith virus fester, and that's not on the right. That's for sure. That's on the left. So the question is, what can we do about it, and what does that mean? What does that mean that tolerance has been cantilevered from people to ideas? Or I mean, why is that umbrella now so wide that we have to respect cultural practices in other cultures? But by the way, the same people, the liberals, they have no problems dumping on their own economic systems or political systems or Western institutions.
Yeah. So
it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. We see this in academia, but when you go out into the streets and you talk to people who haven't been indoctrinated by liberal leftist values, you don't see that at all.
And this is also true, of course, of the political left. They're always so quick to turn on each other for or self-correct each other for their stances towards this or that controversial thing. And yet, they fail to address the things, simply out of their own, lack of willingness to address these issues.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's complicated, but I mean, let's take a look at a specific example. I mean, I mentioned the innocence of Muslims before, or the alleged burning of the Quran. So we see these things, and how do Western intellectuals respond to this? I mean, they say, well, oh my God, this is terrible. We should have more tolerance. These people are the least tolerant people on earth. They're not protesting. They're not rampaging and protesting in the streets because they're, of a perception of tolerance. They're protesting because they think that the Quran has been thrown down the toilet, right? So, but the Western perception of that as well, maybe we need to change. We need to be more tolerant. And that's an enormous problem from our institutions. I mean, how do we change that problem? The first thing we do is we have to identify it as a problem, right? I mean, we could talk about this all day. We could talk about the failure of feminism. We could talk about, how to resuscitate these ideas of classical liberalism. But we have problems that people aren't talking about. And a lot of those problems are related to Islam, but certainly not all of them. It's much more acceptable to criticize the Christian faith in an academic context than it is to criticize the Islamic faith.
And is that because people are scared to do so, though, or is it just because of they're trying to be politically correct?
Both.
It's almost like the governments of the West just don't want. They want to be everyone's friend. The sort of person who just isn't content having anyone dislike them for the right reasons or the wrong reasons. They don't have any character. You just want everyone to love you, and you can't deal with.
And they end up being
bland.
Something.
Yeah,
and then that's sort of what I was talking about. You get on the left, somebody will make a stand. Like, for example, in Australia, Nick Xenophon Senator Nick Xenophon brought up a great inquiry into the funding for Scientology and the tax-exempt status for Scientology. And all of a sudden, and Nick Xenophon, for international listeners, is an independent, okay? So he's not a member of the left, he's not a member of the right, he was just specifically interested in this particular organisation because they are held in so many countries to be a cult, right? So he targeted this one organisation, and all of a sudden people on the left started attacking him, saying, you're being intolerant, you're being ridiculous, and all of a sudden the inquiry became defunct. So, and the same is true of the Catholic sex abuse things. We've got the people on the left bring up cases. They want royal commissions to be held, and all of a sudden you get people on the left attacking them, saying we want to be tolerant of these religious beliefs,
and their pedophilia.
Yeah, well, by extension, of course, and it's just ridiculous. Unfortunately they don't go anywhere because of this ridiculous. I don't know whether it is political correctness or just fear.
So liberalism, to a large extent, has robbed people of the ability to make critical judgments. I mean, think about that. I mean, and again, I can't speak for Australia. I don't know. Invite me, I'll come down with you kangaroo.
You're invited.
But liberalism really has robbed people of this ability to make a judgment, and part of that is because we're teaching people, and I talk about this in my Intel lecture on critical thinking. The atheists and agnostics invited me, that people have been robbed of this ability because, you had asked the question before, is it fear? Yeah, I think some of it's fear. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't afraid, I mean, sometimes more than other times. I go out of my way to try to not out and out offend people. And I mean, I don't draw pictures of the Prophet Muhammad, for example. Right? I don't even mean, lewd pictures. I don't draw any. So again, I think that's counter to what I want to do at any rate. So that doesn't further my agenda.
Yeah.
My mission to help people. But we teach people to withhold judgments about things, and we should be teaching them not to withhold judgments about things, but to make better, more discerning judgments about things. And the way that we ought to do that, in my opinion, is what we talked about before. Teaching them what are reliable ways to come to knowledge, what are unreliable ways to come to knowledge, how do we think through problems, what are good ways to think through problems, what does this mean, and most significantly, why it matters. And as long as those components are absent, then this juggernaut of faith and nonsense, homophobia, and all this ridiculousness will just continue.
Yeah. No, well said. So do you ever foresee, I know you're a sci-fi fan, do you ever foresee a time when, we all have microchips implanted in our brains that allow us to answer the philosophical questions, allow us to, criticize an argument before it's made? You're sort of sitting down at a bar with your friends and you start a sentence, hey, did you ever think, and then all of a sudden the chip kicks in and the argument becomes defunct right there. So, do you ever foresee a time where, we don't have to rely on our own cognitive impairment to counter, for example, the faith virus, and such things become defunct?
That's a good question. I'll unpack it. I mean, if you mean by can I foresee it, is it a question of the imagination? Then yeah. I mean, Ray Kurzweil talks about this, the exponential growth of technology and what it would look like.
Singularity.
Yeah. But is that desirable? Should we want it? No freaking way. Of course not. Working hard through questions, that's exactly what it means to live and examine life. And how you answer these questions, it tells you about who you are and what you value. So I wouldn't want that chip, and I would urge others not to get it.
I don't know. It's being able to play Angry Birds in my head would be pretty awesome, I think.
Yeah, that's different. Yeah, I'd totally want that. Yeah, that would be awesome. I must say, I wouldn't use it for Angry Birds, but if that's what you wanted to do with it, then by all means. But I think it's different from just, having images in our head and manipulating these images. So, you talked about philosophical questions. There's something important about articulating those questions and then working through those, tracing that line of thought down. It really does tell you about who you are and contributes to an examined life. Yeah, so, I was talking about this idea of the goal is really not to create atheists. The goal is to create thoughtful, rational, reasonable people who are capable of using ways to think through problems that are more likely to arrive at, help one arrive at the truth as opposed to help one arrive at some nonsense or falsity. If we can do that, if we can change the perception of reason, if we, how people value reason and rationality, we don't have to worry about atheism. Everybody will be.
It's just going to be a byproduct, yeah.
Yeah, atheism is a conclusion. We should never push conclusions. We should push epistemologies. We should help people. Push isn't the right word, but we should help engender appropriate attitudinal dispositions like a love of reason.
That's what it gets me frustrated too in the atheist community when you do find the equivalent of fundamentalist Christian fundamentalist atheists who are atheists but don't know why really they've just picked that side. It's like you should be one for the right reasons because you understand why it should be a byproduct, not a conclusion that you've picked.
And how high and mighty of you, Pete.
It's not. I'm not trying to be denigrate, but I just get very annoyed when people are just, it's sort of they take it on themselves.
That's super important because you mentioned Dawkins and the God delusion, and I think that's important. He gives the Dawkins scale. I think it's on page 5051 or something like that. And I remember that because I was just teaching it in class. Yeah, so the whole idea of being a 7 on the scale is fascinating to me, although, I had an email correspondence with Victor Stenger, and he told me he was an 8, which cracked me up. But that's good. I'll cart him around with me, make me seem like I'm more moderate. But religion talk, I really tried to articulate what would it take. So I asked people that version of Matt McCormick's defeasibility test, what would it take for you to lose your faith? It's a very quick, simple diagnostic tool that you can use in interventions with the faithful. But my argument, and I wrote that talk, by the way, in literally 3 days. She called me Wednesday to speak on Saturday, and I was like, I came up with everything. The whole talk was from scratch, so it was challenging. I'm still a little bit but, what would it take you to believe in God? And that's a question I think we should all ask ourselves because that helps with our, a fundamental like I talked about valuing reason, but something else that we should value is a willingness to reconsider our beliefs.
Exactly.
And we all need that. And again, it's not about creating atheists. It's about giving people these tools and reliable processes to come to conclusions. We don't have to – atheism is just a conclusion of a reliable process. But we also need to ask ourselves, well, what would it take for you to believe in God?
Yep.
Or anything, unicorns or, little blue, whatever.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah, it's that difference between subjectivity and objectivity, and having an outcome that you want to find. This is what really frustrates me in the scientific realm when you have people studying projects and they have a specific outcome that they want to find, and it shapes how they then look for it.
That's government-funded research.
But I mean, I just want to find out. I want to get as close to reality as possible. I don't care. I don't have a set of beliefs that I need to have incorporated into my reality or else. Yeah. And I think another thing that you said was something like, if someone knows something that I don't know, I want to know it because I want to lawfully align my beliefs with reality. And I think that a lot of religious people seem to sort of miss that and don't understand that it's not about preference. I don't care if reality is unpreferable or preferable. I just want to know what is, or at least as close to it as possible.
Right, and taking that back to the level of an intervention when you're trying to help people lose their faith, that's the behavior that you want to model. You want to really listen to people to understand why they believe. So you're modeling listening behavior, and then you want to kind of help people work through this by showing them, and that's extremely important. I can't stress this enough because one thing that we need to think about is, well, what happens once faith falls? What do we do? Not even on a global level necessarily, hopefully, but even on an individual level. We are responsible. First of all, disabuse yourself of the notion instantly that if you help someone lose their faith, they owe you something. They don't owe you anything.
No, of course.
Exactly.
Nothing. So, they were your pro bono clients, and it was a public service to humanity. So the next thing, how do you help them, right? So how do you help them when they lose their faith? How do you enable them to live a life of reason? Because one thing you don't want to have happen is when they go back into their communities, and that's one of the things we know from looking at the literature on cults. That's how people get dragged back in.
Yeah, that's recidivism.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So how do we help people? And one of the big dangers is that someone will say, "Well, just pray about it." In other words, said before about science, it's a type, you didn't use the word, but the term, but it's a type of confirmation bias. You're asking people to put their beliefs first. Well, just read the Bible and pray about it. Or these phrases in Islam. I was just writing about that the other day. So it's a type of confirmation bias, and it's a community that pulls someone back. So it's incumbent upon us not just to help people lose their faith with these interventions, but to replace that with reason and rationality, and what that means.
Yeah.
Really, sorry, go ahead.
So you've apart from your book, how do we put these things into action? How can we ensure that these values of philosophy do actually proliferate outwards into our communities, into our societies? How do we do that?
Well, I don't think there's any one way. I mean, that's a huge question.
No, I know, and I think I've asked a few rather large questions. I apologize.
Well, one way for sure is through these interventions with people is to become more helpful voices of reason in the streets and practice these. When I get on Southwest Airlines, I can't remember, I was just telling someone this, maybe it was Dan Barker, I don't remember. When I get on Southwest Airlines, I only fly Southwest, or just about only, and I always look for a middle seat, because that increases the likelihood that I'll be next to someone who has faith and I can help them on that trip. So, when I go into the supermarket or, I'm standing in line, every interaction, just virtually every interaction, that's it. It's an intervention. Bam. So if we have enough people armed with these tools, then we can really do some good. But to do this, we really need to create what I call street epistemologists. We need to create people who are very serious about going out and helping others lose their faith. That's only part of it. The Four Horsemen identified these problems, but they didn't give us anything. They didn't give us the tools to help people overcome their faith or to deal with the faith virus, to deal with the problem.
Yeah.
And one of the things my book does, it's an answer to that question. What do we do next? What are some things we can do? I don't think I have the solution. I think I have a piece of it. I certainly don't think I have everything that we need to fight faith.
So you mentioned striking up conversations with people just out in the street or on a plane. How do you start these conversations?
Just genuinely wanting to know. Just genuine curiosity about who they are, and
I know I've sat next to somebody on an airplane who's made the sign of a perfect. The engines rev.
Perfect. That should be the
That always freaks me
ultimate.
out. I must say.
No, that's a wonderful opportunity for you.
Yeah. So how do you start these conversations? You personally.
It's going to sound hokey, but I'm very serious. I sincerely do want to. I'm fascinated by belief. My whole life's work revolves around belief, and I'm fascinated for why people believe things, why they have these belief things that to me are completely preposterous. So I start asking them questions about their belief. But I think oftentimes almost everybody can detect sincerity. And I think those are sincerity and kindness are vital, but sincerity is really important when you talk to people. And, that gets back to your other question. If your wife looked like a rhinoceros or whatever, would you tell her? Question you asked? I mean, the answer to the question is, yeah, you should, but you should watch your words that you use because you want to have genuine relationships with people. And when people ask you a question, they need to know that you speak from the heart and that you're honest with them. I mean, we're not pussyfooting around with people. We're talking truthfully to people about a very serious problem, and a problem that affects us all in a democracy. And people too often are infantilized, and they're not treated like adults. And we need to treat these people like adults. So I'll start my conversation, and I'll be very sincere. Well, why did you cross yourself? And you tell me about that. How long have you had this belief, and why do you believe this? And again, before the intervention even begins, I'm just trying to figure this out for myself.
Do you think in the free thought community that there is a bit too much on the front foot when it comes to these kind of interactions and conversations? Do you think that people need to back off a bit and be a bit more at least respectful and dignant, or give people dignity whether or not they give their arguments and beliefs any respect? Is there a bit too much attacking, like it's offensive almost at times?
I don't know. I don't know if there's any one strategy that will work. And I mean, I can tell you, guides or things that I use that have been very effective. And some of that stuff is based in the literature and some is based in my experience. But maybe somebody really does have a better way to help people out of the face. Sometimes people, I'm very blunt when I speak to people. And sometimes people are taken aback by that. I don't consider it to be rude. I don't consider it to be – I'm not doing it to hurt people. I'm doing it to help them.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think the way that you introduce that, so in the example of the person who's crossing themselves as they sit in their seat on a plane as the engines start to rev up, asking them why did they do that? How long have you felt that way? Those are brilliant questions. I think those are brilliant, and that is specifically what I was after from you. Because all too often I find myself in this situation, and I think a lot of people find it hard as atheists, as activists in the community. How do you strike up these conversations in a way that isn't going to offend somebody, so that you can have a meaningful conversation and not one that just degenerates into a debate or a screaming match or them being offended. And I think that you've just provided the beginning there.
Yeah, thanks. And again, the switch in mindset is this is an intervention. You are a street epistemologist. You are a clinician. You are somebody who sees a problem in someone else. You have an opportunity. This person is not well. Their cognitions have been damaged. How do you facilitate belief change and help these people? And as long as we keep that in mindset, it doesn't become a debate. Now, look, some people are going to be offended. That's just the fact. There's no question about that whatsoever. We can't worry about everybody who's going to be offended.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, ask yourself what the goal is. And I've always believed, or let me rephrase it. I believe that the way to do this is to go after faith. That's the thing that's not possible to defend. That's probably the one piece of advice that the vast majority of people will ignore. They'll go after God.
Yep.
That's a mistake.
I think you're totally correct, and certainly in the idea that we do all too often, us atheists who are on sort of the activist side, who do go out and speak to believers quite regularly, we will often go after God or we'll go after the Bible.
It's a mistake.
It is, yeah. I totally agree, and I see where you're coming from there.
Yeah. So here's like a pointer. I don't know. Pointer sounds kind of condescending, but here's a strategy that I use.
You are a professor, after all. You're allowed to do that.
Yeah, but it's not about my rank or my status. It's not. It should be about what reason should shine through. It should cut through like a butter knife all the bullshit in the world. So. Here's one thing that I would advocate is in all of these discussions, first of all, never bring in facts. Facts are a complete waste of time. So especially the more fundamentalist someone is, the less
facts don't matter. Yeah.
Yeah. People don't find themselves into cognitive sinkholes because they believe on the basis of evidence and facts to begin with. So no amount of evidence and bring that into discussion, no amount of that is going to do anybody any good. It's not going to help your client, right? It's just not going to work. Instead, focus on epistemology. Focus on how someone knows. That should be the bulk of your initial questions. Once you figure this stuff, gee, that's interesting. Like, how do you know that? And you'll see that there are only three ways people can know things. The only other way people can claim to know things is they can redefine the word faith. And that word, that's a key word. It's a vital. That's a little more complicated, and it goes off it's kind of extra topical, or it goes off the track for what you've asked. But don't bring in facts. Talk about epistemology, how someone claims to know, and then systematically look at those claims and then give them a Socratic treatment. In other words, give them a question and answer. So you're asking questions and you're listening, and you're basically asking people if the views that they've just talked about actually make sense. And you find it will be shocking to you how many people at some point in the discussion will say, well, geez, no, actually, you're right. I don't think that makes sense. But, and then the but will be, I want to hold it anyway. Mm-hmm. That but is the vital moment. That is the crucial linkage between professing to have a belief because it's true and professing to hold a belief because it's socially useful. That's the essence of the intervention right there. If you can get that people to that point where they question their faith, then it's pretty easy. Then they go to another stage, right? So then they're no longer in pre-hope. They're in another stage. So this idea then that the universe could have always existed, all someone has to do is admit that that's possible. The moment that somebody admits that that's possible, that has created a moment of openness in their belief system. In other words, that has by definition undermined their faith, because then they can't claim to know something.
Yeah.
So is it possible that the universe always existed? Well, someone said, well, I suppose maybe it's possible. Well, the moment that someone says, assents to that, says maybe it's possible, that means they have to become less sure of their own faith.
Consider my mind blown.
Yeah,
this is really good though. I'm going to use it. It's raining today, so I'm not going to go out to the city tonight. But
Jake's just going to rush down to the supermarket and unleash. Get in line. Someone behind me. Someone in front. Let's go.
I see you wearing a cross there. I like it. No, it's really good. So, Peter, when is your book going to be coming out?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I actually wanted it out in time for the holidays to spread some holiday cheer, but I don't think that's going to happen. But it should certainly be finished by the end of the December, and then
for the next holiday, for Easter.
For Easter, that's right. We put it out in the next holiday. How appropriate. I articulated things, and I've been using that word a lot tonight, but I talked about things that I haven't talked about before that are directly from the book. And frankly, I don't even think these ideas exist. I don't think anyone's ever come up with – I don't mean to sound arrogant. I really don't mean to sound arrogant, but I read constantly, like 24/7. I've never seen any of this stuff.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Nobody talks about ways and I see, because I'm ex-religious, and I see – I remember receiving booklets and books and talks and tapes, videotapes and audio tapes that we'd take home and listen to, and you'd read the messages, and they would tell you how to evangelize, how to stand on a street corner and talk to people. But there is nothing. There is zero, zilch, nada, nothing from atheists saying how we do that exact same thing. And it's astounding to me, because we have so many skilled academics, so many skilled professors, so many skilled teachers.
Who are terrified.
Yeah, and that's the point. They really should be promoting these amazing tools. Just the Socratic method is so useful, but so few atheists know how to use it. And unfortunately, what happens is we get the angry atheists who tend to be the ones that go to the street corners to debate atheism, and they do a disservice, I think, both to themselves and to the movement in general.
They push people further into their pathological beliefs.
So true.
So the question is, it really is a question. We need to create an army of street epistemologists. I am convinced that is a solution to the problem. We need to create people who actually go out into the streets, into any place the faithful reside, and immediately begin treating them. My goal really is, I'm a father. I've got 2 kids. My goal is to make a contribution to push back faith, to put faith in its place, to discredit faith. And really, I really believe that a way to do this is to create people who go out and they fight faith.
Yeah.
And I was just at the FFRF conference, and I met Dawkins, and they talked about, they had this thing about the clergy project, and that was fascinating. And then they had some really, really interesting discussions about people who were believers who no longer. So we know that this is possible. I mean, we know that you can reason people out of beliefs that they haven't reasoned themselves into. We know that because we see these guys who've done it.
Yeah, and it's so sad for those people. I basically started the podcast for the same reason that you wrote the book. I have 2 kids, and I want nothing more than to create a world without faith, where they can safely, reason themselves through the reality of this world. And exactly. I don't see that happening right now. We have to combat them all too often in Christian schools or in public schools where Christians have proliferated. It's a hard place, but that's absolutely why I started the podcast.
The faithful have done. They have tried unbelievably. They have even made it a meme. The angry atheist. They have tried to push this narrative that all atheists are angry, and if you don't have God, you'll be angry. And that's even more reason that we have to fight this with kindness, because people subscribe to this, even people who don't consider themselves to be particularly religious. Well, you're an angry atheist. And it's vital, like your show makes a contribution to that by dealing with this with humor. Yeah. But we can't do – the meme is already there. It's already there linguistically. So we need to combat this through our behavior of being ultra kind to the faithful.
Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah, and there's some fascinating studies about why people convert – and I don't mean religiously convert. I mean change sides in a war. My mentor was telling me this, and one of the main reasons that people change sides in a war, commit treason, is because they were told one thing in their training, like the North Koreans are savages and they eat their kids. But when they get captured by the North Koreans, wow, these people aren't too bad. They treated me really, they were pretty cool to me.
Yeah.
Like that elicits change behavior. So we need to start thinking about what are those things to elicit change behavior in the faithful, because and they will react to this stuff. They're going to react by entrenching the angry atheist narrative. They're going to, who knows what they're going to do?
Yeah, I think I was probably pretty worried about it, because I have a book as well, and it came out at the beginning of last year. And did pretty well here in Australia, and in fact even in the US. I have a lot of Christian people that I hang around with, and I lost quite a few friends. And then further, when we do the street walking on a Saturday night and talk to the street preachers, those people can get quite scary, when their beliefs are challenged.
Yeah.
And I've made a concerted effort to change the direction of the conversations. We have some very, as you were saying, angry atheists in the atheist groups that we have around Brisbane and Queensland. Yeah. And I have no doubt that it's pretty much the same the world over. They are very much concerned with going out and shouting at these people, saying that the Bible is wrong, saying that their God is a dickhead.
That's going to entrench them in their delusions.
Absolutely, and you're so right. And so I've been making a concerted effort with a bunch of friends that we've really tried hard to change this message, to make sure that the believers know that we're coming there, to discuss rationally and quietly and openly and sincerely, why they're there, etc., etc. And I've found, recently that we've, since we've made this change, that we get so much better reaction, not just out of the believers that are there to street preach, but out of the crowds that gather.
Yeah, that's actually, and that's one of the things I talk about. When you're modeling behavior, you're not just modeling it for the believer; you're modeling it for everybody else. You're modeling it for the people who watch. The other thing is, I don't like to frame it in these terms, but you should think about, what is a victory condition? What does that look like? And it is too unrealistic to expect that someone is going to lose their faith after one treatment. Yeah. Sometimes these things take a long time. And, I know one woman, I've been working on her for years. I still haven't been able to help her. So, there are no guarantees in the faith business. Everybody does the best that they can do. But I don't believe that these people want to have delusions. I don't believe that they somehow want to believe things that are false. I believe, like Plato said, I think Plato's absolutely right. People will make a choice because they will act a certain way because they think they have all the information. They're either have starting faulty information, or something is wrong with their values, or maybe even their cognitions, or maybe even a neurological level. I don't know.
Yeah.
And from there, either that or they'll think that they're basing their belief on evidence, which not, or they won't understand that they have to base their belief on evidence. And so the thing is, well, how do we, again, this is the move, how I want to advance the conversation. How do we help people? Not how do we win. It's not about winning. If you want to think winning of, like that's why I say I don't like the word victory. Winning is creating a little bit of cognitive doubt in someone, some space to allow them to doubt something, to be less dogmatic, less confident, less arrogant, less certain, more humble, more open to the possibility that they could be wrong.
The change in how I've decided to talk about religion or faith with the believers that we speak to quite often came from a philosophy class that I accidentally did at university a couple of semesters ago. And I think a lot of what you're describing, in fact, I can think of it allegorically in Plato's allegory of the cave.
Right.
It's that perfect illustration. We've been taught a particular way to act, a particular way to think, and we're being shown images that are structured for us. And it takes one person to free themselves to then, go and see the light, and then come back down to teach the rest of us how to see the light. How to realize that the reality that we've been shown isn't correct.
Right. That's exactly right. That's a great, wonderful, lovely way to think about it. But remember also what he says in that passage in, I think, Book 7 of the Republic.
Yep.
When Socrates goes back into the cave to tell the people, hey, look, the stuff that you're seeing is an illusion, Plato is very specific. He says if they could kill him, they would.
In 1923, archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the undisturbed tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. Carter drilled a hole in the tomb opening big enough to fit his head inside. When asked if there was anything inside, he replied, "Yes, wonderful things." Among the greatest treasures found that day was a golden tablet inscribed with hieroglyphics which, once translated, read, "Listen to the ImaginaryFriendsShow.com podcast, your source for science, skepticism, politics and current affairs," which seemed both terribly long and horribly anachronistic. But he did listen, and it was good. And now all of his friends listen, and you should too. www.imaginaryfriendshow.com.
All right, well, thanks very much for coming on the show, Peter. I really appreciate it. So how can people get in contact with you? How can people find you? How can people stalk you, et cetera, et cetera?
Just home address, phone number.
They can Facebook me. I don't think I have anywhere near the number of friends you do. They can Twitter me. I'm at Peter Bohgossian, PeterBohgossian. They can email me, although I'm pretty busy to get to emails, but I really do try to get to people's emails. That's pgb@pdx.edu, pgb@pdx.edu. You can also find some of my content on philosophynews.com, and I'm always looking for feedback. If there's something I said that I don't know, a way that I articulated myself or conceptualized a problem that it could have been better clarified, then let me know. I'd appreciate that.
Best attitude ever.
And willingness to reconsider.
Absolutely. The podcast itself doesn't hold that same thing. We're infallible, so nobody write in ever and tell us that we've done something wrong, because it's impossible. We can't do anything wrong.
Yeah, either it didn't happen or we don't care.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and you guys are a lot of fun, and you really made me laugh, so I thank you for that.
No, we thank you for coming on. Thanks very much, and thanks, Pete. You're
very
wonderful. Absolutely. And listeners, until next we speak, Godspeed.